This video is brought to you by Tab for a Cause. Install the extension in your browser to raise money for Ukraine by just opening tabs. The link is in the description.
As you've probably already noticed, Putin's invasion of Ukraine has brought NATO out of the shadows. The transatlantic alliance that Emmanuel Macron described as brain dead in 2019 looks more relevant than at any time in the last 30 years, and a number of European countries have begun to consider membership. So, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at how NATO might change in reaction to the war in Ukraine, not just in its membership, but also in its deployment. The most obvious change to NATO will be its membership. As we've detailed in other videos, both Sweden and Finland are considering joining. Recent polling has found that an all-time high of 57% of Swedes and 68% of Finns support NATO accession, and Nordic media has reported that both countries plan on applying to join simultaneously sometime in the next few weeks. As you'd expect, this hasn't gone down too well with Putin, and Russia has tried to deter both countries from joining. In February, Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson warned of a, quote, military and political consequence if the countries joined the bloc, and in April, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov warned that if Sweden or Finland joined NATO, Russia would have to, quote, rebalance the situation, possibly by deploying nuclear weapons in the Kaliningrad Oblast. Last Friday, a Russian military plane briefly entered Sweden's airspace in what was perceived as an unsubtle warning to the country against NATO membership. Nonetheless, this hasn't deterred either Finland or Sweden, not least because Russia probably already has nukes in Kaliningrad. Sweden and Finland's accession prospects have already improved over the last few days. On Tuesday, Olaf Scholz stressed that Germany would protect both countries, even if they weren't in NATO. And on Wednesday, UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said it was, quote, inconceivable that the UK wouldn't defend Finland or Sweden in the event of invasion. The same day, the Swedish Foreign Minister announced that Sweden had received security guarantees from the US if it applied for NATO membership. These security guarantees, even if they're not as ironclad as NATO's Article 5, will guarantee Sweden and Finland some degree of security while their NATO applications are processed. Now, we should say that Finnish and Swedish accession to NATO isn't yet a foregone conclusion. Sweden's ruling Social Democratic Party, which has traditionally opposed NATO membership, is divided on the issue, and the Croatian president recently announced that he would veto their accession if he could. Nonetheless, at this point, their eventual accession looks more likely than not, and this would be the first big post-Ukraine change to NATO. They're not the only countries who could join NATO, though. Clearly rattled by Russia's newfound belligerence, on Wednesday, Georgia's president urged a, quote, quicker and surer path to NATO accession, although NATO looks unlikely to accept a member with an ongoing border conflict with Russia in the near future. Anyway, that's the first big post-Ukraine change to NATO, its membership. But the war in Ukraine has also caused another big, perhaps less obvious change in NATO in its deployment. Over the last 2 months, NATO has rapidly deployed troops on its eastern border. At the end of last year, NATO had less than 5,000 troops on its eastern border, spread evenly across Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland. Today, that number is nearer 40,000. Deployments in all of these countries have been significantly augmented, especially in Poland, where NATO now has over 10,000 troops, and troops have been deployed in Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria. Including national armies, this means that NATO has some 330,000 troops on its eastern border, with some 130 aircraft on high alert and around 150 warships patrolling the seas. This already massive number will rise to above 350,000 in the next few weeks, as over 20,000 NATO and Joint Expeditionary Force troops, including 8,000 British soldiers, perform expanded joint exercises, the largest of their kind since the Cold War. For context, pre-invasion, the Russian army was estimated to have around 600,000 personnel in total. Russia's Western Military District, which covers territories bordering Finland, the Baltics, Belarus and Ukraine, has about 300,000 troops stationed there. Obviously, this massive troop build-up is in response to Putin's war in Ukraine. Pre-invasion, NATO had 5 response plans drawn up in anticipation of an invasion. When NATO leaders met for a virtual summit on February the 25th, a day after the invasion began, they agreed on triggering all 5 of NATO's response plans, leading to this massive troop build-up. The rationale here, at least according to NATO's Joint Command, is that more troops on the eastern border should better deter Putin from expanding his invasion into one of Ukraine's NATO neighbours, like Poland or the Baltics. Now, this is probably true for the moment. The Russian army currently looks very unlikely to start a war with a beefed-up NATO, especially given that it's already struggling in Ukraine. Nonetheless, even if it's a justified response to Putin's aggression in Ukraine, NATO's troop build-up on its eastern front will raise tensions in Moscow at a time when neither side enjoys the safeguards of the Cold War. Both the INF Treaty, which banned cruise missiles with a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometres, and the Open Skies Agreement, which allowed Russia and NATO members to conduct reconnaissance flight over the other's military sites, have been torn up, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine has implicitly rubbished the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, which required both sides to avoid new deployments on their borders. Russia's Chief of the General Staff has also apparently rebuffed attempts by the chair of NATO's military committee to set up communication channels. To be clear, we're not suggesting that NATO should wind down its operations on its eastern flank. We're just pointing out that NATO today has more manpower than ever on its eastern flank without any of the Cold War safeguards. And this should worry, well, anyone who doesn't want a war between Russia and NATO. So that's how Ukraine has changed NATO. It's encouraged other countries like Sweden and Finland to join the alliance and triggered the most impressive troop build-up on NATO's eastern flank in 30 years.
It's easy to find everything around the world a little overwhelming right now, but there is one small thing you can do to help. You can donate money to causes that you care about without spending a penny. Yep, really. That's because Tab for a Cause is the sponsor of today's video, and they allow you to donate money just by using your browser. They support charities like Save the Children, who have been working to provide life-saving interventions in Ukraine since 2014, working to provide the most basic needs to vulnerable families, as well as providing psychological support and increasing awareness of the hazards of war. So, what can you do to help? Well, if you head to tabforacause.org/Ukraine, you can add an extension to your browser which raises money to help the people of Ukraine every time you open a new tab. Yeah, it really is that simple. And you can even track the impact you've made personally. And you don't need to worry. They're not doing anything scary. They're just putting a couple of ads in the corner of your new tab page. And the money raised from advertisers goes straight towards the cause. Smart, right? Well, as I said, you can easily support the people of Ukraine and help contribute to the $1.3 million raised so far by heading to tabforacause.org/Ukraine. Thanks for your support.